कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी करती हैं मुलाकातें, कभी यादों में बरसातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें। मन की गहरी झील में कूद जाती हैं कभी, सोच के दरिया के संग संग बहती जाती हैं कभी। चाहे शाम हो या हो रातें, किताबें करती हैं बातें।
Hello and welcome to the program. Our guest today is the diplomat and the inimitable author, Mr. Navtej Sarna. Navtej, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Let's start with The Exile because that has made the most impact of late. Let's talk a little bit about what was it about Dalip Singh that impressed you so much?
Well, I think, I'm not sure if impressed is the right word, but I think it certainly impacted upon me because he is a very poignant and a very interesting character in Indian history and in Sikh history in particular. He was the last king of the kingdom of Lahore. I mean, the Sikh kingdom of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, which sort of was immediately dissipated after the Ranjit Singh's death in 10 years. And he was the one, as a young boy, who went off to exile in London. He changed his religion twice. He at one time was a great votary of Queen Victoria, and then he rebelled against
and then he started calling her Mrs. Fagin because
Mrs.
he was so
Fagin, and you know, he went through these tremendous changes as both as a student of history and as a novelist. I mean, he's a very irresistible character. You need to know what was going on in his mind and what was happening. And second thing was that very little had been done on him in terms of looking into his mind. You know, he has been dismissed somewhat casually and usually pejoratively by earlier historians and by British historians in particular.
Now, this is a character that stayed with you for almost 45 years. Because you must have been a young kid when your mother told you about Maharaja Dalip Singh. So it took a long time for you to kind of write this.
Yes, I think these are journeys that we all go through, and then, you know, I didn't know 45 years ago, whenever I first heard mentioned that I would actually attempt to write books. And then when I was actually writing my books, and then then the story comes back, and then for about 8 or 10 years you're struggling with how to tell the story. Because it's a whole new ball game to take a historical character, set him in a historical context, and then try to write it as historical fiction. So it was a process of learning, and it took its time.
And here also you kind of play with fire in a sense, because you've got 5 main voices of the 5 narrators, and you've used the first person as a narrative device. What drew you to doing that?
Well, I think the idea behind the book dictated the voices and the use of the first person, because the idea was to explore the psychological and emotional dimensions of Dalip Singh rather than historical facts. The historical facts are all known, and nothing has been changed in this book of the historical facts, like when he left Lahore, when he went, which date he wrote which letter, when he met his mother, when she died, etc. All that is historically correct, in fact. What has not been done was an examination of what would be going on in his mind. And for that, I think there's nothing like the first person. And the other voices were all of people who at various times were privy to his thoughts, were privy to what he was going through. And so I thought it would be a good device to tell the story from his voice as well as from the voice of other people who were his sort of witnesses at different parts
and these are voices which are not really well defined in history. These are shadowy characters like Mangala, for example,
Yes,
his mother's maid.
Yes, all the voices are of characters who are historically existed. There's John Logan, there's Lady Logan,
Arur Singh.
there's Arur Singh, Christopher Tevis, Carol Tevis, who was the spy, and Mangla, whom you mentioned. But they played bit roles, particularly Mangla. I mean, she was really a footnote in history, and you can't find her in all history books either. But we know that she was a dancing girl who became a close confidant of Rani Jinda and played a major role in the court intrigues after Ranjit Singh's death. So I took that, and the rest was a fictional creation of her character and her voice and her tone and her personal experiences which come in. Similarly with Arur Singh. Arur Singh was very close to Dilip Singh. He was his valet. And there are bits and pieces in history where you find that, Dilip Singh treats him as his son, or you find one photograph somewhere in Elvedon with Arur Singh standing in the corner of the photograph. So I picked up these bits and pieces and gave him a voice and gave him a background and gave him a role.
Mangala in particular is a very, very strong and feisty voice, and her language, for example, is very rustic, which you would expect in Punjab.
Well, I'm glad that worked, because I wanted it to be like that, because there was this dancing girl who comes to make her fortune in this city of kings and rich people, Lahore, and the fabled gullies of Lahore in the 19th century, and she goes to Hira Mandi and becomes a dancing girl, and then from there she's not satisfied with that, so she wants to move on in life, and somehow so we created this little story of how she goes from one person to the other until she reaches the palace, and there she catches Ranjit Singh's eye, and then he sends her off as one of the dancing girls to his youngest wife, which was Rani Jinda, and from there she develops a destiny of her own.
The recreation of the court, the life in court, or life in the gullies of Lahore are all seen through the eyes of Mangala, and that is a Lahore that most of us are not familiar with, including the system of sati, for example.
Right.
One in modern India doesn't think that ever happened in, say, the Sikh kingdom.
Well, it did, and till a few years ago, I mean, I think that they've been removed now, but I think just outside the Lahore fort there is a samadh of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and there is a stone platform, and there are little cupolas which contain the ashes of all the satis who did sati on his pyre, including 2 pigeons, I believe, because they just flew into the fire and were cremated. So I'm not sure if the cupolas are still there. When last seen, I did see them. But similarly, these were traditions which were very much prevalent even in the Sikh kingdom, and there were satis were performed with on Ranjit Singh's pyre, Sher Singh's pyre, all the Jawar Singhs, and of course all the Dogras who were very prominent in Ranjit Singh's court. So it was very prevalent, and because many of the Maharanis were, there was this sort of free integration from different religions in his court. Many of his Maharanis were from Kangra and various places where there were these traditions which were prevalent, and they were not all from Jat Sikh families. So they were from different places. And his court had a reflection of, there were Dogras, there were Muslims, there were some Sikhs, there were Pandits as senior ministers. So it was really a very secular kingdom in that way.
Now, when it comes to the voice of Mangala, for example, you're already talking about a 17, 18-year-old girl who's highly ambitious, and so you've entered her mind. But with Dalip Singh, here's a little child. You talk about his memoirs, and he goes back to his childhood from the age of 5 or 4, whatever, to the time when he dies. To kind of grow with the character must have been quite a special experience for you.
Yes, it was all all a very special experience. I mean, I virtually lived with this book for 8 or 9 years, just imagining and trying to recreate, reading his letters, for instance, to see what's the kind of voice he used, visiting every place I could where he lived, and he lived in a lot of places. I can tell you that, not only in England but also in France. He used to change his houses very often. So I remember dragging my family around all over the streets of Paris, trying to find every place where he would have lived, just to see what he would have seen outside his window, what sort of light he would have seen, what sort of feeling, what sort of breezes he would have sat, or sitting outside the Kremlin. So I was very fortunate. I was able to go to most of those places to get a sense of place and
but also
time.
to somewhere revisit the mind of a child, because you mentioned those very beautiful things that you attributed to him. For example, he says that he received a mechanical toy from the British, and he talks about their sense of justice and how he was happy.
Yes, if they took away his mother and gave him a mechanical toy. So, for a while the child was happy.
Yes.
Because they sent him off to Shalimar Bagh and they gave him a new winding bird, which he was very kicked with, until he realized that his mother had been separated from him virtually for the next 15, 16 years. And yes, I was fortunate. There are references to the young Dalip Singh, for instance, in the recollections of Lady Logan. And there are letters by John Logan to his wife. They were the missionary couple who basically took him in their charge, and under whose sort of implicit guidance he converted to Christianity. And there are letters, etc., which talk of how we will celebrate his birthday and what we will do, etc. So I use those references to sort of then take them into a child's mind, and what a normal 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old would feel at these things. I mean, there would be this mix of fascination for the new, mixed with sense of loss, a sense of emotional, separation and all that. So, well, you mix it all up.
In your first novel, We Weren't Lovers Like That. Now that also is in first person.
Yes.
Aftab's character, his life might have taken a different trajectory from yours, but one can see a lot of Navtej Sarna there.
Oh my
his
God.
love for Delhi, his connection with the Doon Valley, for example, and the various haunts in Delhi that he loves, which I think most people who've grown up in Delhi would kind of identify with. So when you do that kind of a first person narrative, a lot of the author comes in. How do you manage to keep yourself out as an author when you do a book like The Exile, or does it not matter?
Well, it matters. It matters, frankly. And I think the first book is always very different. And there is more of the author that comes in, I believe, that exists in We Weren't Lovers Like That, and certainly that exists in The Exile. Because The Exile had a certain historical framework, and it had given characters, and there was that much less scope for bringing my own thing. Of course, a lot of your own consciousness and your own treatment of reality comes in and goes into different voices. But in We Weren't Lovers, there was obviously, being the first book and being a kind of freewheeling, purely fictional landscape where it was inevitable that the author's own observations or fascinations or feelings or experiences, for that matter, and certainly descriptions of Delhi and Dehradun and the Doon Valley, etc., it was inevitable that they would come in, and frankly, I made no attempt to keep them out, because I think it's a little artificial to say that, no, this is purely fiction, I have nothing to do with it, I'm just a writer. No, we are not. We are all human beings.
That is why I was trying to draw the difference between, the process, the mental process for you when you wrote We Weren't Lovers Like That and The Exile, because here are these disparate voices where you have used different language for them, the sounds and textures of each character. So to keep yourself out of it, because this is a historical perspective that you're presenting, was it a conscious choice?
It was a conscious choice. It was a conscious choice in terms of The Exile, and there were times where I would let myself move in more freely. And for instance, when there are gaps and you really are looking at, what the child is feeling, what the young man is feeling, or what he's seeing and what he's thinking about, there you have a little more play of your own consciousness coming into it. But in a open literary novel like We Weren't Lovers Like That, there are no such limits, and you can really let yourself go and come out not maybe in one character, maybe you can come out in 3 different characters. So, in different things, because ultimately all that you write is being processed in the writer's mind. And even if he says that, okay, Aftab took a train from Delhi to Dehradun, and how do you write that? Unless you try, inevitably it will be a lot of the train journeys you did, and that will sort of come in, and then you may change and twist it according to the demands of the plot. But there is a lot of autobiography, not in a technical, detailed, factual sense, but in a emotional and consciousness sense that comes in.
As a translator, you've done Zafarnama, Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Zafarnama, and your own father's short stories on partition called The Savage Harvest. I just want to draw your attention again to the writing and the process for you. Somewhere you have mentioned, in acknowledging your mother's contribution to your writing, that she taught you how to see the light in the changing seasons. So that kind of propensity for detail, has that been a part of the process for translation, for example?
I think that is part of the process of all our writing. For instance, in our family was very given to books and literature, and both my parents were always only talking about books and literature. And certainly these things help, and you become your sensitivity to certain things comes up, because as you say, the changing light, changing of the light. My mother would always say, now it's changed, the light has changed today. So you figure out how to, so then you also begin to notice these things. So that certainly helps. I don't know if it directly impacts on the translations.
The other thing that I've noticed about your translation is that, when you've written The Exile, you have used language which is the language of the people. There are a lot of words which are from Punjabi, which you've not bothered to translate, and you've kept it in its purity as is. But when you translate your father, for example, you have done translations. For example, there is this description of her eyes. I think Neeti is the character. And you said that it was like somebody had, that the golden sunlight had melted into sapphire waters. Now, that probably is some sort of a direct translation of
what was written.
Of what was written.
Yeah, because in translation, it's not your work.
It's not your work.
So you owe it to the author to depict what he wanted to write. Naturally, it isn't always literal, because then it would become
a little farcical,
perhaps. Very awkward. And there is I've sometimes mentioned it. I mean, there's this famous Israeli author, Amos Oz, whose books have been translated into dozens of languages. Right. And he told me that I tell my translators that please be unfaithful so you can be loyal.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes.
So, you have to be unfaithful to be loyal sometimes. As a translator, you have to move you have to get the sense of the sentence rather than every word in the way it occurs. You can't just, because languages don't behave the same way. Punjabi certainly doesn't behave the same way as English.
Right.
So you have to do it. But when you are, of course, writing your own fiction, then yes, the voice depends upon the character, so you have a little more freedom.
And when you did Zafarnama, for example, now Guru Gobind Singh Ji's poetry is exquisite with its own cadence, which is kind of unusual. So what was that process of translation?
Oh, that was a very spiritual, very emotional, very powerful process to actually read his poetry, to understand it, to understand its historical context, to understand his character, what he actually would have meant, and what, because and then to try and again there you are dealing with a text which is almost religious.
Yes.
So you really cannot be playing fast and loose with and you have to be very careful as to the meanings and the implications of everything, particularly given the fact that there is no one said version of the Zafarnama. So you find different versions with minor changes creeping in because of one reason or the other. So that was a very it was literally like walking on glass and making sure that you got the right thing and you put enough footnotes to explain other variations, etc., and you tried to be as true as to the text as you saw it.
But a wonderful end result.
I'm glad that it worked. Thank you.
You said your family, both your parents, your mother's a poet and your father, of course, was the highly regarded writer. And now, of course, this has gone down to your son.
Yes.
He also writes. So does that make you especially proud?
Well, yes, it is. It's he's carrying on a family tradition, which is always very nice, and so I think it'll carry on.
Well, we hope so too, Navtej, and thank you so much for being on our show.
Thank you very much.
Hope to
Pleasure.
see you again soon.
Thank you. Pleasure being here. Thank you.
Pleasure.
I have with me Mr. Cyrus Mistry, whose book, The Corpse Bearer, DSC Prize. So tell us a little bit about this book that's getting so much press and great reviews.
The odd thing is that it focuses entirely on a small subcaste in the Parsi community, which
The Khandyas.
the Khandyas, which actually is totally segregated. Originally, a few years ago, they were completely not allowed to mingle, not leave the towers of silence and mix with other outsiders, not attend weddings or few other kind of social occasions.
Right.
So they sort of live in isolation. Used to live totally in isolation. Now, of course, things have changed and they are a little more free to go out and so on. But they specialize in performing certain kind of rituals and cleansing the body, the corpse, and carrying it up to the towers of silence.
Right. So what kind of rituals do they perform? If you can tell us?
These rituals, there are priests also involved in the rituals. So the priests are saying some prayers, but the washing of the body, the anointing of the body with this sacred kind of bull's urine,
Right.
and they sort of block the orifices, and all these certain procedures are there, which because among the Parsis, the belief is that anything which is dead, any lifeless matter, is considered impure. It's considered to be a source of contamination to living people, and therefore these Khandyas are totally isolated and not allowed to mix with.
And what is the kind of status that they have today? Are they still as isolated, or have they mixed?
Yeah, today things are much better for them, I think, because they are allowed to mingle a little bit after going through certain ritual kind of ablutions, cleansing ablutions for themselves, and they also have better facilities. They have some facilities for their children, schools and things which they can attend. And
Well, would you like to read a passage from there?
"Enough said," rumbled my father, looking completely distraught. "I have heard enough." "Not the half of it, Daddy," continued Wispy venomously. "I haven't told you the worst part. Temu Kaka's ultimatum to Firoz is that if he wants to meet Sepide again, he should be willing to marry her and work and live with her at Dungarwadi. Salo Badmash. That was my father's only impulsive outburst, and for the first time in my life, I saw a spark of hatred in his eyes. But it was there for only a moment before it faded. Meanwhile, Hilla and Wispy were speaking at the same time. An insult to our family, proposing such a thing to the son of a high priest. How dare he talk like that, the drunkard? He should be thrashed, flogged with sticks and chains. 1,000 lashes would be too little. Teach him a lesson, Daddy. Complain to the panchayat and get him sacked from his job. Then he'll learn his position. Such insolence. While my mother and brother were engaged in this monody of vengeance, I remained completely silent, my eyes transfixed by the great jumble of my father's grey beard that seemed to me to quiver and twitch ever so slightly. His eyes, beneath those shaggy eyebrows, were on the verge of dissolving into tears. When he spoke, the other two persons in the room fell silent. Listen to me, Firoz. Without knowing it, you have become entangled in something that goes back many years. This man has been waiting patiently all these years to find the right moment to plunge his khanjar into my belly. And now it's in, he's twisting it. You don't know what all this is about.